Happy Sunday, everyone. Welcome to Our Issues Birmingham. Today's guest is Lloyd Peeples. I've known Lloyd for a number of years. Lloyd is the first Assistant United States Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama, and he's here with us today to talk about things that are going on at that level of law enforcement, I suspect. Welcome to our show, Lloyd.
Thank you very much.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
I haven't seen you in a bit.
It has been a while.
So the Northern District of Alabama covers from Birmingham on and a little bit further south of Birmingham, all the way up to the state line at Huntsville and all east-west in between for the most part. Is that a fairly accurate statement?
That's right. Basically halfway between Birmingham and Montgomery up to Tennessee.
So how did you end up being first assistant, and what is your history with not only that office but also the state of Alabama, and how'd you end up here? How did you end up getting on this show?
Well, that's a lot of stuff. That's a mouthful. I joined the U.S. Attorney's Office back in 2003. And I was just a regular line prosecutor and handled white-collar fraud cases and public corruption cases and a lot of different stuff. Up until around 2012. In 2012, I left the office for a few years. My father had a family business that he needed some help with, and so I left the office. And Jay Town, the current U.S. Attorney.
No S.
That's right, no S, just T-O-W-N. Jay reached out to me when he was going to get the nomination to be the U.S. Attorney and asked me if I wanted to come and be his first assistant. The first assistant is sort of like a chief of staff. Or a chief deputy. It's the number two person in the office, sort of his right-hand man. U.S. Attorney involves a lot of public speaking opportunities. He sits on a lot of committees, a lot of things like that. And so a lot of what I do is run the office on a day-to-day basis. People sort of bring things to me. I collect the information, and Jay and I probably talk 6 or 7 times a day about different issues, cases that are before us. Different folks that are looking for grants, local and state entities that are looking for grants.
Law enforcement agencies mostly?
Some law enforcement agencies, also organizations like One Place and people like that do counseling for victims and things like that. DOJ just has a number of financial reasources that are available, and we can help facilitate them and introducing them to the right people.
Yeah, I was going to ask, where does the grant come from?
Most of the grant comes from in Washington. But we've got folks in our office that can help, organizations that are looking for grants. They know how to write it. They know how to help them, get it to the right people and make sure that it gets, fair consideration. And we've been, fortunate in Birmingham. Birmingham's probably received over $1 million a year from federal grants to a lot of different organizations. But it's it's a very good thing that DOJ does, is they take money and put it in the hands of local agencies that are actually doing the work.
If a local agency, and I'm not trying to inundate you with grant requests, but
that's right.
If there is a local agency, they just need to reach out to the U.S. Attorney's Office?
There's an individual in our office named Jeremy Scherer.
Oh, I know Jeremy.
And Jeremy is the person that's our point person for all of that. So all the requests go to him, and he's got all of the information. And depending on what the grant is, if it's a victims grant versus a law enforcement grant, that's 2 different funding sources and 2 different groups. So he knows all of that stuff.
And I'm sure there's some qualification requirements
That's
before
correct.
You can even get to the level of asking.
No, that's right. You've got to show that you've got, financial procedures in place, and there's reporting requirements and things like that. You don't just get the money and go do whatever you want to with it. You've got to come back and file monthly reports and show what you did with the money this month and how much you have left and how much goes to overhead and how much goes to other things. So it's a very involved process. There's a lot of people don't even apply for it, frankly, because of, the headaches that come with
the bureaucracy,
Correct.
The bureaucratic morass of
Unfortunate-
paper.
Unfortunately, but it is, it's federal taxpayer dollars, so we got to make sure that it's going, to the right places and we're not just writing checks to folks.
Well, I know this also from firsthand experience. Aside from his administrative duties that he's talking about now, you are a rarity in the world of prosecutors that you're still in the courtroom on occasion.
I do enjoy courtroom work. I don't have the caseload that I used to have because I do have these administrative duties, but I still like to get in the courtroom from time to time.
Do you get to pick and choose, or do they come to you?
I do get to cherry pick sometimes. If it's going to be something that I get involved in, I want to make sure that I have the time to do it. So I'm not going to get involved in 2 or 3 cases at a time. I'll just kind of see what's available when my schedule frees up.
In terms of public safety, that's a very large concern of our viewing audience, I'm sure. And we pick up the paper. Well, that's me dating myself. There is no more paper. We open up our app to read the news, and we see lots of violence going on. What can the public know from the U.S. Attorney's Office is being done to try to work on not eliminating it, will never be eliminated, but to minimize that going on in our community?
Well, one thing over the last few years that we've done is we've reached out to a lot of state and local agencies, and we're working with them on going after what we call the worst of the worst. And those are individuals that have been prosecuted multiple times at the state level, but the prisons are overcrowded, and it's a revolving door. Sometimes these people, they go to prison for 6-9 months, and then they're back on the street. And so what we've tried to do is to get federal resources and federal prosecutions behind some of these worst of the worst, and make sure that they serve real time in prison.
Because Alabama has had, right now we're packed in terms of prison, and we're almost under a federal order. But I want to come back to some other things. I want to talk about the Department of Justice and some things of national interest. We'll be right back. This is Our Issues Birmingham. Don't go away. Welcome back to Our Issues Birmingham. I'm talking with the United States Attorney's Office First Assistant Lloyd Peeples. We cut to commercial talking about what your office was doing to assist local agencies in terms of repeat violent offenders. You mentioned coordinating with local agencies and trying to engage some prosecutions. I know personally from what I do that there has been a tremendous increase in volume of cases at the federal level under Jay's term.
Correct.
So what specifically, how do you make that happen? And are they being receptive to the assistance of y'all's office?
Yes. I mean, it's really been sort of a perfect storm of things. The department has given us some resources to hire several new prosecutors for our office. So our office has actually grown, which means we can handle more cases. We've also really made a concerted effort to reach out to DA's offices, sheriff's offices, police chiefs, and say, look, bring us these worst of the worst cases. Our numbers, we prosecuted more defendants last year than have ever been done in a 12-month period. So you're right, numbers are on the rise. Most of those are felon in possession cases, 18 U.S.C. 922, which is where if you are a felon, you are prohibited from having a gun. And if you have been convicted of 3, violent crimes and you have a gun, then it's mandatory that you go to prison for 15 years. And those are the kind of cases that we've been seeing, and the state loves for us to take those cases. Mm-hmm. A lot of times these individuals are, again, they're problem individuals. They know who they are in the community because they cause, a lot of havoc. They've, been part of, family gangs, not real gangs, but, these gangs that have committed a lot of crimes. And at the state level, they just can't figure out what to do with them. So we go after, we prosecute them. And the other thing that happens is when they go to prison, they don't go to prison, just down the road here in Alabama. They go to a federal prison. Sometimes it's in Montana, sometimes it's in Colorado, sometimes it's in Texas. And it really disrupts them being able to participate in the criminal enterprises that they've been in. They lose contact with a lot of their, other associates that used to do drugs, guns, all of those type of activities. So you're not only are you taking them off the streets, you're moving them hundreds or even thousands of miles away so that they can't be an influence on the community.
Are you able to follow up on your efforts and see if there is a reflection in the reduction of violent crime
It's
in
not,
the Northern District?
I think Birmingham has posted some numbers recently about overall crimes going down. We've seen that in Tuscaloosa and Anniston and in Huntsville. Unfortunately, it's one of those things that, you don't put 5 guys in jail and, the next month see crime rates drop. It's a slow process, but what we're doing by getting rid of those worst of the worst, you're right, the problem's never going to go away. There's still going to be, committing the people who are going to commit crimes. But what we're doing is we're taking the guys that are shooting people, the guys that are committing, multiple assaults and rapes and things like that. And we're taking those folks off the street. And what's left behind are, still serious criminals, but they're not as serious. They're not those worst of the worst that are really causing the most damage.
And I do know from personal experience that one of the things our state legislative body is working on as we speak are modifications in the bonding processes in state court. And federal courts, of course, have rules that are different than state court rules when it comes to bonds in violent cases. So you're able to have people detained regardless of the presumption of innocence pending their day in court.
That's true. And there's no shortage of stories in the media about individuals who are out on bond from one crime that then commit another. We've seen carjackings and shootings and things like that committed by folks that are just waiting their day in court, for 18 months or 2 years until they can get prosecuted by the state system, but they're out on bond and they're committing these other crimes.
And I think local judges get a bum rap for allowing bond when Alabama law mandates that they be given a bond.
It's a complicated system, and really, there isn't one easy fix. I'm hoping as well, and Jay and I have talked about this, a number of times. But we would love to see Alabama come up with a comprehensive approach to addressing the problem because it is a public safety issue.
Are you involved in the state and local legislation?
Unfortunately, we can't get involved in, we're the federal government. They don't like for us to advise, state legislatures and stuff like that. So we have to stay, out of that. But it obviously affects what we do on a daily basis. It affects who we're going after, and it's something that we just love to see addressed appropriately.
Well, I think what people don't understand is government is not one big happy family. There's state government, there's federal government. They're different, and they both have responsibilities. And even an individual that is prosecuted in state court can be prosecuted in federal court even for the same behavior under certain circumstances. And people don't understand that. And even within each of those government entities, there are agencies that are also independent of one another.
They are.
So there are lots of moving parts there.
They are, and that's one thing that we've done to help things along is to create the coordination among those agencies to where we've got the FBI and the ATF, and the DEA and Secret Service all working together and pooling their resources instead of having them, trying to elbow and jockey with each other.
Yeah, and try to fight for statistics.
Right.
Yeah. All right, we'll be back in just a minute. Do not go away. This is Our Issues Birmingham. I'm going to go into some national issues when we come back. Thank you very much. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Our Issues Birmingham. I'm Tommy Spina. We're talking with Lloyd Peeples, the First Assistant U.S. Attorney here in the Northern District of Alabama. So lately, there has been some outcry and contention coming out of Washington. You mentioned the Department of Justice. There seems to be some cage rattling going on between the Department of Justice and your ultimate boss, I suppose, would be the Attorney General of the United States.
I guess the ultimate boss is the president, but yeah, if you keep going up all the way.
Well, based on some things that have happened, I believe you're exactly right, because there seems to be some territorial issues going on. And I've always complained in the wake of recent developments in the recent years that there's been some erosion of the separation of powers clause of the United States Constitution and the state constitutions. And everybody's trying to get into everybody else's business. What kind of, are y'all having to deal with any of that on a local level? Is there a trickle down effect?
We don't. I mean, most of what we do has been the stuff that we've been talking about. It's violent crimes, it's gun crime cases, it's stuff like that. We don't have any of the cases that you've seen in the news where there may have been some talk about, political consequences and things like that. We just don't have those, cases. The cases that we have are, again, violent crime, public safety cases. It's a situation where you hear stuff and you see stuff in the media, but it's just not anything that affects what we do on a daily basis. Any more than local political issues about a governor's race or something like that affects what we do. I mean, we see the news and we read the news just like everything else, but our marching orders have been consistent, whether it's been under General Barr or General Sessions, and really since I started with the department back in 2003, we handle the crimes that are committed in Birmingham and we prosecute those guys, that go after them. And what we receive from the department is, sometimes what I would consider to be very macro encouragement. Like, we need you guys to address opioids and the opioid problems. And, we've got a dedicated prosecutor in our office, and that's all he does is opioid cases because Washington said, look, you need to go after those kind of cases. So we receive that kind of macro view as to, cases that we need to go after, but they don't get involved in, which individual cases, are handled or which decisions are made on an individual case. That's left to Jay as the U.S. Attorney. He's the ultimate person in the Northern District, and he puts his name on every indictment that we do. And so he's the person that's, responsible for deciding what we do on those cases, whether it's, who we indict, who we reach plea agreements with, and cases that we don't go forward on and maybe let, the state handle those cases.
Well, people ask me sometimes, everybody knows I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and I have been for 42 years, but they say, well, what kind of cases do you handle? And I'll say, I do what they do. So it changes.
Right.
So over the years, there was a time when big, large drug conspiracies were a thing. We still have horrible issues with child pornography, not as voluminous, I don't think, but there are incidences where those deplorable type cases are brought about. And so I'm called upon to defend those on occasion. So that's the answer to the question. Right. Whatever y'all are doing, it's we're in the same business, for lack of a better word, as is law enforcement.
Well, I mean, let's go back to 2008, 2009. We handled a lot of mortgage fraud cases during that time because mortgage fraud was a very big thing, and the administration under President Obama made a very big push about going after mortgage fraud cases. So we had one or two folks in our office, and that's all they did was mortgage fraud cases.
I remember those days.
I know that created some of those, again, if we're creating defendants on that, then you've got to figure out a way to defend them. It's not much different. We talk about football a lot. It's not much different. If you have an offense that's going to start spreading the ball out and passing the ball, the defense has to figure out how to stop the pass. Yeah. If we're going to start handling mortgage fraud cases, defense attorneys are going to have to defend those cases.
Or represent those individuals charged with them.
Correct.
You speak of opioids. That has been a huge problem in our society. In my opinion, there's conflict at the corporate big pharma level with what's going on in the manufacture and putting them out, and also what's happened with the tightening of the opioid accessibility. We've created, like whack-a-mole, a heroin problem.
Right.
We are addressing heroin issues and opioid issues still. We haven't let that go in light of the violence question, I assume. And we're also addressing some compounding pharmacy issues that are going on around the country.
Correct. And it's a big problem that I think people hear about it. But, in Jefferson County, we hear about all these gun violence and all these shootings and all these murders that happened in Jefferson County. We had more opioid death overdoses in 2018 in Jefferson County than people were shot and killed and murdered. And,
Wow.
almost twice as many.
Well, and also what people don't understand is it's not a demographic that's limited to the poor and impoverished. It cuts across all levels of our society.
It is, and you've got to address it from a bunch of different aspects. You've got to address it from the prosecution. You also have the treatment aspect of it. There's, again, a lot of these problems don't have a simple, fix. They involve folks that, are from my office, but also from other agencies that can chip in and help out as well.
Yeah. Well, I know that to accomplish that, you have to not only get your office involved in that treatment aspect of that, but also the judiciary has to buy into it as well. And I, those of you who don't know, today's Ash Wednesday. We're taping on Ash Wednesday, and but we have to get more New Testament in our thought processes and less retribution in that instance, I think, personally.
I understand. We'll bring them to court and we'll let the judge decide.
Okay. Well, thanks for being with us today. I appreciate you taking the time to come over here and tape our show. This is Our Issues Birmingham. We'll see you next week.